Hello, this is Harvey Ambrose. I'm a guest minister on the Wells of Salvation Radio Ministry, preaching tonight to Grace Baptist Mission in Soldotna, Alaska, continuing our study of the book of Daniel. And we come to chapter 4. Daniel 4, and I'll begin reading in verse 1. I intend to read the whole chapter, but I'm going to break it into pieces. So, chapter 4, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, and the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them. But they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, behold, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the air dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried out, and said thus, Hew down the tree, cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, scatter his fruit, let the beast get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, forasmuch as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation. But thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. I'll stop reading there for just a minute. There's so much to comment on, I can't comment on all of it. I'll just do the best I can. In the first place, unless I've totally missed something, this is the only chapter of the Bible that was written by someone who is a pagan. I mean, in the first person. There's a lot of things written about pagans, but written by a pagan. This was a decree. It wasn't just something he wrote. It was a decree to his whole dominion. And as far as it would be transported after that, because it said to all people. It's from Nebuchadnezzar to all people, all nations, all languages that dwell in all the earth. And that first verse ends with, peace be multiplied unto you. I want you to notice that, because if you read the letters, the epistles of Paul, they almost always contain peace being multiplied unto you. What a strange thing for Nebuchadnezzar, a great man of war who had conquered one kingdom after the other and built his empire, to write in such a way. Notice verse 2. He says, I thought it good to show the signs and wonders of the high God hath wrought toward me. Now, lost people don't think that way. I think I ought to tell people about this. And I remember when I got saved, and you probably do when you got saved, that the Lord just put it on your heart. There's a verse in the Bible, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. It's a command that comes from God. He doesn't write in the Bible, oh, well, it says you got to say so. He writes it in your heart. He puts it, it makes it seem good to you. And it is a good thing to share the wonderful things that God has wrought towards us. Then he begins praising him in verse 3. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders, his kingdom. Now, this is something that Daniel had already told him about when he first had the vision of the great statue. He said there's going to come at the time of the fourth kingdom, which would be Rome. The God of heaven would establish a kingdom that would never be destroyed, and it will be an everlasting kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar believes that now. He objected to it. He built the kingdom or statue all of gold because he didn't want Babylon to fall. But now he's praising the God of heaven and his wonders and his signs, because he had seen his signs personally, sent him from God in dreams. And he says it's an everlasting kingdom. His dominion, so his rule over it, is from generation to generation. Think about what that means, because kings, they're dynasties, if you will. They'll either be just that man, or maybe he and his son, or his grandson. It'll last a few generations, maybe, and then it goes to someone else. King Jesus will always reign over the kingdom of heaven. Somehow, Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king, or at least erstwhile pagan, knew that and believed it. And believed it was important enough to tell the people of this whole world, irrespective of where they live or what their language is or what their tribe is, he thought they needed to know this information. And God had a high enough respect for what Nebuchadnezzar wrote that he included it in Scripture, which means it's all true. Every bit of what is said here is true. Now, the first 3 verses were probably written, and it takes a lot of study to figure all this out. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. That's known. He had exclusive sovereign rule over Babylon that long. He co-ruled with his father for a while before that, but he ruled exclusively as king over Babylon for 45 years. The events that he's about to relate in verse 4, they occurred about 8 years before he sent out this proclamation to all the nations. So, and then 2 years after he sent it out, he died. So he died on the 45th year of his reign. 2 years before, when he was 43, he wrote the proclamation. And 8 years before that is where verse 4 picks up his story. I hope you understand that. So he's going back. He's writing a proclamation to everyone about glorifying God, but he takes you back to an earlier time in his life, specifically 8 years prior. So it would have been, well, you could do the math faster than me, but I think it would have been like the 31st year of his exclusive reign. Which, by the way, he had just finished conquering Egypt. And the last of his enemies that he had any issue with, they were defeated. He was at peace. He had conquered all of his life and all of his rule up until that point. And now he is set on beautifying Babylon and glorifying his kingdom and living as long as he can. And you can read that. So he says in verse 4, so he goes back now, I'd say 8 years. And he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house. Now he would not, as a king, he never said he was at rest if he had enemies afoot. He would not be resting. He says, and flourishing in my palace. He had conquered all. So he was rich with gold. The hanging gardens of his palace were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Babylon, we read about it earlier, one of the greatest cities to exist ever on earth. He says, I saw a dream, made me afraid. The thoughts upon my bed and the vision of my head troubled me. He was at peace. His enemies were conquered. He was rich beyond imagination. He ruled the greatest empire the world had known up to that time. The 3rd great empire of men. Previously Egypt, then Assyria, now Babylon. But the dream troubled him, like that first dream of the statue troubled him. And he did the same thing he did with the first one. He calls in all the people that can't answer the question. He calls in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, to interpret the dream. But they could not do it. But at the last, Daniel came. Now it could be that Daniel sent the magicians to him first, because he was the ruler of the magicians. The king had said that. It says, Belshazzar, master of the magicians, he's talking to Daniel. That Belshazzar's is the name that the king gave him. So Daniel. So he may have just sent them because that was the order of business. He would send his employees, if you will, Daniel would, to the king. If they could help, they helped. If they couldn't help, at the last he would come. Anyway, he came. Verse 8. And the king relates what happened. At last Daniel came, and he says, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. He mentions this, I think, because before this is over, you're going to see that he got saved. Not only is this a unique chapter that is written by not one of our prophets or one of the great kings or any of that, it was written by a king that had been a pagan, and I believe it's the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, of being saved. It is his salvation testimony. When the Lord puts it on our heart to tell us that it's a good thing for you to tell people about this. So go tell people. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. When he puts that on our heart, we should not hold back. If the Spirit gives us utterance, and we should always be seeking that before we speak to people about being saved. I need to seek him before I preach, more than I do. If I don't seek him, I'll fall flat. And how well I do usually depends on how well I sought him. Relaying your testimony of salvation to someone requires the same diligence. And you need to hear from God somehow before you do it, so that you know that he'll bless you in the doing of it. But when you tell it, I always think it's best to tell it warts and all. Remember, if you're talking to a lost person or someone you think might be, they're sinners, just like you are. They've done bad things, just like you have. They may think that it's unforgivable, just like you may have thought. They may think that they knew something about God, just like you thought you did, until you got to know God and you realized you knew nothing at all. You have to tell it like it is. I think Nebuchadnezzar tells it like it is. When he speaks of Daniel, whom he loves, without a doubt by this point, by the time of when he wrote this proclamation, even 8 years earlier he had a high esteem for Daniel because he made him chief over his magicians. But he mentions that he called him after the name of his God, which was Bel. So he called him Belteshazzar. So he named this Hebrew boy after his God. He's admitting that he had a false God. At one time he worshipped an idol. And he speaks exactly what he spoke to Daniel. And it says, according to my God, and in whom, speaking of Daniel, is the spirit of the holy gods. As though there were multiple gods, and Daniel's God was just one of them that happened to know everything. And somehow that didn't register with his lost mind, that the one who can answer about my dreams, there's only one that can do that. When Daniel had interpreted the first dream, he said, my God is a God of gods. There is but one. But that was lost on Nebuchadnezzar earlier. And he's just admitting to that now. By the time he writes this proclamation, something has happened. But he's writing about 8 years earlier. So I'll continue. So he tells them about the dream and how they had troubled him. And it was on his bed. And he tells them about this tree. He said there was a tree. It was right in the middle of the world. And it was huge. It reached to heaven. And you could see it from the ends of the earth. And then he starts talking about how glorious it was. He said the leaves were fair or beautiful. The fruit had a lot of fruit. Meat for all, meaning food. It fed everything. It fed the beasts of the field. They had shadow under it. They got shade. The fowls used it to rest and to nest in. It says all flesh was fed of it. Now when we learn what that is, well, I'll just tell you what it is. It's Babylon. The tree is Babylon. The vision was a vision that God gave them of a tree, but Babylon by that point was truly in the middle of the known world. It covered a vast area from almost down to the Indian Ocean up to the Baltic Sea, from the Mediterranean all the way over to Persia. It was huge. It was the greatest empire the world had known. It had influence over everything because within it was the entire trade route between east and west. So when it says it's in the midst of the earth, that's exactly, it was in the middle of it geographically, it was the middle of it commercially speaking. All trade routes between east and west went through Babylon. That's one of the reasons it was so rich. It was perfectly situated. It was on the waters. It was on the rivers. Traffic could happen. And he says, I was at rest, but I had this dream. And then it says, a watcher came, which it means an angel from heaven, not one of the devils. He says, a watcher, a holy one, showing that it was a good angel, came down from heaven. He cried aloud and he said, hew down the tree. If you remember John the Baptist when in Matthew and in other places, he's talking to the lost Pharisees who had come for his baptism, but they did not have fruits that were suitable for people who had repented, meaning they still had their pride about them and their distrust of things and their, biased attitudes towards Christ. And he called them a brood of vipers. And he tells them that the axe is already laid at the root of the tree. Okay? And that the Lord was going to come and judge the nation of Israel, and that the wheat of that nation he would garner, he would thoroughly purge it, and had a fan in his hand to purge away the chaff. He'd gather the wheat into his garner, and the rest of it, the chaff, would be burned with fire unquenchable. So John the Baptist was prophesying about an axe chopping down a tree. The fact that the axe is laid at the root of the tree means that God also saw Israel as a tree. Does that make sense? We also know that he sees them as, in one place, it was an image, it was a statue. He also sees them as animals. So, the beast that came up out of the sea, and the woman that rode upon the beast, all the stuff that's in Revelation, the great dragon, and all those things are represented by animals. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, we'll see those same animals pictured a little bit differently, and again representing kingdoms. Now Nebuchadnezzar could have not even wasted Daniel's time, probably. His magicians and soothsayers and all that, had they bothered to read a book, could have read what the meaning of the tree was. Because it had already been written in the Bible. It was written by Ezekiel. Before Nebuchadnezzar ever had this dream, Ezekiel wrote about a tree. It was something that was addressed to Pharaoh. So God was having Ezekiel tell something to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So in Ezekiel chapter 31, said, it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, and the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, meaning Ezekiel, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, meaning his whole nation. Whom art thou like in thy greatness? Just what degree of greatness do you have? Verse 3, Behold, the Assyrian. Now, Assyrian's already fallen to the Babylonian Empire. Actually, it fell to God when God destroyed the Assyrian host outside of Jerusalem. But Babylon picked up the pieces. So Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and with shadowing shroud and of a high stature. And his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great. The deep set him up on high with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out their little rivers unto all the trees of the field. Therefore his height, how high this tree was, this cedar, was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters. It was well watered when he shot forth. And the fowls of the air made their nest in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations. So he's speaking of the fallen Assyrian Empire, God is, and he's telling, you tell Pharaoh this, who thinks his kingdom is something. By the way, Egypt was the first world empire. Assyria was second and was greater than Egypt. Thus was he fair in his greatness, in the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. It speaks about the Garden of Eden, which is amazing. The cedars in the Garden of God could not hide him. He was so big. I mean, the empire was so great. The fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of God was likened to him in his beauty. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. Anyway, I won't go through all this, but what he goes on to tell Pharaoh is he's been cut down to nothing. And who do you think you are to continue in your state of sin? Because if you keep doing that, I'm going to conquer you. And he did by Nebuchadnezzar. And shortly after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Egypt, by the direction and power of God, God sent this dream to Nebuchadnezzar, where Babylon is depicted as a tree, in the person of Nebuchadnezzar himself. He says, later on we'll say, you're the tree, is what Daniel tells him. So, Pharaoh would have been a tree in the same imagery that represented Egypt. Sennacherib would have been a tree that represented Assyria. And now Nebuchadnezzar is a tree that represents the kingdom of Babylon. Just like Christ is representative of the kingdom of heaven. He is the head of it, the founder of it, the ruler of it, the conqueror that brought all the people into it from all the places that were scattered in the world, and will reign forever and ever. There will not be a successor. All these other kingdoms, they fell by the dust, and some other kingdoms succeeded them, but not so with the kingdom of God. I'm going to have to hurry. So get on down, and I'm just saying that this interpretation is not unique. When God interprets things a certain way, you'll see a consistency of it throughout prophetic scripture. and even that which is not prophetic. Well, I guess John was prophetic, because he said, the axe is already laid at the root of the tree. In other words, it's ready to be struck down. That was a prophecy, but it was short in coming. And you know, Nebuchadnezzar is not the first pagan that God prophesied through. Remember, even Caiaphas, the high priest that year, said, you understand nothing. You don't understand that it's convenient for us that one man die and the whole nation perish not. And the Bible says, he didn't say this of himself, but because he was the high priest that year, God put it in his heart. I mean, see what I'm saying? He was a wicked man, but God prophesied through him. Okay, I'm going to have to hurry. Let's get down to where I stopped reading. And that would be in verse 19. So here Daniel, now having heard the dream, it says, then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was astonied. The word means, it's a little bit more than astonished, so it's a slightly different word in English. So it would have been a slightly different word in Aramaic in which this was written. But the meaning of it is stunned. He's stunned. Like he's stunned into silence. It says for 1 hour. He just sat there stunned in front of the king for an hour. So much so that it says he was stunned and his thoughts troubled him. So Nebuchadnezzar spoke, and he said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. So he's saying, don't be afraid to answer me. I just want the truth. What does this dream mean? He ruled a long time already. He figured he could handle whatever it was. I don't know what it was, or he just had pity on Daniel. He thought maybe Daniel was afraid that he might lift his head off his shoulders if he told him the wrong thing, and he's just assuring him that it'll be well with Daniel if he goes ahead and tells the truth. So Daniel says this in verse 19, my Lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. He's saying, it ought to be your enemies that this dream is about. I would wish that it would fall upon them, because it's a bad dream. It's a prophecy that is harsh. And I would not have it happen to you. I'd rather it happen to your enemies than to you. You know, Daniel, it never says he hated Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, why would he? Nebuchadnezzar had made him, a high officer in the court. He put him over the entire province of Babylon itself, the capital city of the empire. I mean, he fed him, he clothed him, he gave him his whole living. He was a servant to the king. He had not lost his faith in God. And yet he no doubt loved the king. And just because people are lost doesn't mean we should hate them or even dislike them. To the contrary, we're supposed to love them. And even if they wrestle with us and try to, say things that are ugly towards Christ or towards us, we're reminded in the scripture that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's not what we're here for. We wrestle against principalities. We're talking about against, evil and darkness in high places. We're talking about angels, fallen angels, and the devil. Those are the ones that plague us and that are plaguing those people who are sometimes making themselves to be our enemies. But we're not to think of them so, even if they think of us as their enemies. Daniel was of a good sort. He loved his king. So now he goes on and he tells it in verse 20. The tree that you saw, which grew and was strong, whose height reached to heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit was thereof was much, and in it was meat or food for all, under which the beast of the field. I mean, this kingdom was so glorious that Nebuchadnezzar, by the power of God, had built, that it became an ornament of the world. It was feeding people throughout the empire. It was bringing in wealth. He was doing exactly what our presidents ought to be doing for the United States. He was making all the decisions that made us prosperous and free and happy. Okay, he was doing his job. Nebuchadnezzar was, He was a brutal man at times, but he was doing his job for the sake of the kingdom. He was being a good king. He says, and upon whom the fowls of heaven had their habitation, it is thou, O king. The tree is, you're the tree. Thou art grown and become strong. He's grown since he's taken over the throne. He's become the strongest nation, the strongest empire on earth, and set right in the midst of it. He says, for thy greatness is grown, and it reaches unto heaven. God takes notice of it, is how I would read that. And thy dominion to the end of the earth. Everybody knows about Babylon. It's interesting to think that in Revelation, Babylon is used as the last kingdom of men. It's called Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. I'm sure there was plenty of that going on in old physical Babylon too. There was wickedness there. There was wickedness in the king. He was an idolater, even though God had twice now visited him and made him sorrowful. Now this is the third time, and yet he still persisted in his idolatry and in his pride. Verse 23, he says, and where, this is Daniel, and where the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump and the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven. And let his portion, meaning the tree's portion, meaning Nebuchadnezzar's portion, be with the beast of the field till 7 times pass over him. I have found no one that can explain brass and iron bands, so I'm going to try to explain it for myself. The tree is cut down, but it leaves a stump with a root system there. If you leave a stump out, it's been my experience, if you cut them off and you do nothing to the top of it, the rain will come down and mold will get into it, and it will mold and rot at the stump, which destroys it from the top. My guess is the brass, which it doesn't rust, they had a brass cap over it is the thought. You know, God was like placing a protective layer over it and binding that in place with an iron band. What this means is God protected Nebuchadnezzar's rule throughout the 7 times that are about to pass over him. I mean, he's king, but he's lost his mind. It would have been easy for someone to take his throne because he could have done nothing about it. But God prevented that. I think that's what the brass and the iron. So that he leaves the root of the man there. He's still there. The kingdom is waiting for him until what? Well, until he comes to his senses and repents. So Daniel goes on, he says, this is the interpretation, O king. This is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my Lord the King. And he says, this is what's going to happen. They shall drive thee from men. Thy dwelling shall be amongst the beasts of the field. And they shall make thee to eat grass like an oxen. And they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven. And 7 times shall pass over thee. Now, it's 7. It could be 7 days. It could be 7 months. It could be 7 years, 7 decades. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't have 7 more decades. And 7 days is not long enough for his nails to grow out like eagle claws, nor are 7 months. Nor for his head, his hair became, it says like eagle feathers. I think that means dreadlocks. You know how people, if they don't do or tend their hair at all, it just all starts bunching up into clumps of stuff. I think that's what it's talking about. So I think this is 7 years. 7 years. And until after 7 years, till you know that the Most High, speaking of God Almighty, ruleth in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, that thy kingdom shall be sure to thee. God's going to keep it for you. After that thou shalt have known, so it's sure for thee until after you know that the heavens rule. See, Nebuchadnezzar didn't believe that the gods ruled. He thought that the gods served him. That's how most pagans thought. The God, they could pick him up. They could make a new one. They could decide that, they could do whatever they wanted to with him. They still prayed to him. They knew there had to be something out there, but they wanted a God that suited them. They got to pick and choose. Well, that's just not the way it is with the true God. He's the one that rules. And all you can do is serve him. You got to bow to him. So he says, when you reach that point, you get your kingdom back. Okay, so Daniel continues, wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto you. He's telling him, do it now. He's trying to tell him to repent now. He says, be acceptable to you, and break off thy sins by righteousness. Stop sinning and do what's right. And thine iniquities, quit being iniquitous, the breaking of laws, by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. In other words, if you repent now and start doing what's right and cease to do what's wrong, you might continue in your peace and your rule. This is a warning from God. It's a prophecy too, but it's a warning. Like there was a warning given to Nineveh. Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be destroyed. But they repented, and God did not destroy them until many years afterwards. And he saved the whole city, from what I can read. Start with the king all the way down. Verse 28. We're back to Nebuchadnezzar talking about himself. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end, so Nebuchadnezzar is saying, this is what happened to me. At the end of 12 months, he, speaking in the third person of himself, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon, where he had been at peace. And the king spoke. It's like the man who had the great crops, and he said, hey, he said to his soul, look at what I've got. I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger ones. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. It's like, for I've laid up much goods for myself. And God stopped right there and said, you fool. You don't know, but tonight your life is required of you. Nebuchadnezzar was walking in the glory of his kingdom, in the heart of his palace. And the king spake, and he said this, is not this great Babylon? Okay. In other words, he had heard what was going to happen. Daniel told him that God was going to humble him for 7 years and treat him like an animal. He just couldn't believe it. So he says, is not this great Babylon? In other words, I've got control over my life. I've got control over this kingdom. I do a good job. I'm a great tree that can be seen from the ends of the earth. And I do much good. It had to be his thoughts. Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? He says, I did it all myself. He gave no credit to God for ruling in the affairs of this world, for giving strength to him, for choosing him to bring about his purposes on earth. Rulers need to understand that whether they're good or bad, God put them where they are to bring to the nation that they rule what God would have brought to them. Whether that be punishment and judgment, or whether that be a blessing because the nation was pleasing to God. I think our United States was pleasing to God, and God gave us rulers, and they were a blessing. And when we've sinned, he's given us ones that are not so good. Anyway, he says, he said those words, taking credit to himself, and assuming that he could handle whatever it was God wants to throw at him. And while he was speaking, verse 31, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. They shall drive thee from men. Thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee eat grass as an oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee until thou know. So he's even prophesying how long it'll be until he knows that the Most High ruleth in the kingdoms of men and giveth it to whomever he will. We need to understand that. We think we have the power of the vote. Do we really think that we have the power to pick the rulers of this earth? We have the right to vote. We have to take in question now how much reality there is in that anymore. But even if it were honest and true elections, do we imagine, because we pick our rulers, that God has nothing to do with who rules this country? This powerful nation on earth that has become, some call it an empire now, even though I think that's a horrible word to describe our nation, who used to hate empire. Now they speak proudly of ourselves as being an empire. Anyway, we need to learn that lesson just like Nebuchadnezzar did. And so it says, verse 33, the same hour was this thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. God doesn't wait. When it's time to act, he acts. It's like he says, it's appointed a man wants to die. He has an appointment with God right then. After that, the judgment. It says, so we need to make sure that we're ready before that time comes. It says, same hour was the thing fulfilled in Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men. He did eat grass as an oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven. He had no shelter. Till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers. Another translation, I think it's the Septuagint, talks it like it's like a lion's mane. You know, kind of long, shaggy hair around the head. It says, and his nails like bird's claws. In verse 34. And at the end of the days, meaning at the end of 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. Remember the story of the prodigal son? You know, he told his dad to give him what his share of the inheritance was, and his father gave him all his living, and he went out to a far country, and he lived it up in riotous living, and he wasted all of his money, he had nothing left, and eventually he was reduced to feeding swine, you know, for a place to live, and he would happily eat what the swine were eating. So he ate pig slop and was glad to have it. That's what he would fain eat, what they ate. He was glad to eat it, glad to have it. But after a while, it says, and then he came to himself. It's as though he had lost his mind, and he did, to leave his father's house and to go off into a sinful world that treated him badly. No one loved him, and he finally came to himself, and he says, why am I here? I mean, my father's servants are treated way better than what I am. You know what? I'm going to go back and try to serve him. And I'm not worthy to be a son. I know what I've done. What I've done is bad, but if he'll just have me as a servant, it'll be better than eating pig slop, you know. So he came to himself. I remember coming to myself. Now, I'm not going to say it's on my own, but I reached a point in which sin lost its appeal, life lost its appeal, hopelessness reigned in my heart. I could think of nothing good to think about. It was a really bleak life. Someone told me about being saved, and I suddenly thought, if all it takes is prayer, I'm going to pray until something happens. He told me, my friend did, that God told him he was saved. If God told him he was saved, I'll never believe I'm saved unless God tells me I'm saved. And I'm going to pray for that. I'm going to pray for something from God until I get it. It's like, why not do it? You know, up until that point, I never even considered doing it. It never entered my mind to do it, but I came to my senses. It's like, why be miserable? If there's a possibility for happiness, why live in death if there's a possibility of life everlasting? Why live in shame if there's a possibility of the remission of sins and a thorough washing of myself? It just made sense. Nebuchadnezzar says, At the end of the day, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes to heaven. So I looked up towards God, and mine understanding returned to me. And what did he do? Sounds like he got saved. He says, and I blessed the Most High. There's no more discussion of gods, nor does he talk about how great he is anymore. You never hear Nebuchadnezzar say one more bragging word, except it be about the Lord. I blessed the Most High. I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. He has no successor. And all the inhabitants of the earth, compared to him, are reputed as nothing. Nothing in this earth is even close enough to be compared in any way. They're nothing compared to his kingdom. And he, meaning God, doeth according to his will in the army of heaven. It tells us that there's an army in heaven. See, Nebuchadnezzar saw it. He does exactly what he wants to. He orders that kingdom. He governs that kingdom. We read about Christ. He says, that the government shall be upon his shoulders, and of the increase of his government and his peace there shall be no end. So this is what maybe Nebuchadnezzar saw. He says, army of heaven, and so he does according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. So he also does with us as he wishes. And none can stay his hand, nobody can stop him, or say unto him, what doest thou? There's a lot of people that do. They say, well, if there is a God, blasphemy right there, why does he let this happen? Judging God, as though they know what God knows. And they don't. That type of stuff. I wouldn't have thought twice about saying something like that when I was lost. But once God brought me to my senses and saved me, I understood. Whatever he says goes. He's sovereign. Now, sovereign doesn't mean what some people think, that he fatalistically predetermines everything for everybody forever. It just means that he is omnipotent. He has all power. And he has all wisdom and all righteousness, so that everything he does and determines to do is perfect from inception. I don't even think he plans it. Every thought he has is pure and perfect. If he thinks of a kingdom, it's a perfect thought and it comes out perfect. See what I'm saying? If he thinks of creating a world, it's created. And he just speaks it and it's perfect because he's perfect. To question him, who do you think you are? Choosing our president or our king, or telling me I can't do that without punishment, or whatever we like to question him about. Nebuchadnezzar learned better. Verse 36. At the same time, my reason returned unto me. So right when that happened, right when he got saved, my reason returned to me. And for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness. So I got it all back. I was over Babylon again as though I had never left. I got my understanding back. I had my right mind. He probably got some new clothes and a bath and a shave. Probably got a new hairdo, to make himself presentable to people. He says, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me. See, before, he was always seeking to them. He was Nebuchadnezzar. He ruled. He says, is this not great Babylon, and that I have built, and for my might and my power and my majesty? And here, come tell me this, and here, go do that. He was ruling that way. His rule obviously changed. His manner of leadership changed. He says, my counselors and my lords sought me. They wanted to know. They wanted to know what I had to say. They wanted to learn. Maybe they wanted to know what happened to him. What can make such a profound change in a man? When I got saved, I had people that I had worked with. They noticed the change, and they came and asked me about it. What happened? What happened to you? You're different somehow. And when I found the right time, and I felt the Lord was I would tell them what happened. And they can do with it as they wish. That's what Nebuchadnezzar is doing here, and he's writing it down. And God put it in the Bible. And it's all true. My counselors and Lord sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom. And excellent majesty was added unto me. And God had called him the head of gold. He says, now, I, Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't say king of Babylon. He doesn't say the ruler of the seven kingdoms. He doesn't say any of that. He just says, I'm Nebuchadnezzar. I, Nebuchadnezzar. Praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. Well, who is the King of heaven? Jesus is the King. It talks about it when he says, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. And the gates respond, well, who is the King of glory? He says, he that is strong and mighty to save. Well, who saved us? Except the Lord Jesus. I extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. Says the man that Jesus abased for 7 years. He says in one place, humble yourself in the eyes of God, and he'll lift you up. Or else the Lord will do the humbling, and you might still get lifted back up. We have to get to the bottom of self-conceit and self-love and love of the world before we have any room in our heart to accept the gift of life everlasting at the hands of the King of heaven. And I'll end the message there and